In the early Wild West days, 2003, of large language models, we performed this insane experiment. We thought we could achieve some kind of recursive superintelligence by building models trained entirely on the output of earlier models. We were chasing the dragon, looking for that perfect refined silicon brain. But what actually happened was a digital version of Habsburg inbreeding. The generated output was never as good as the input. By the fifth iteration, the models didn't just drift. They plummeted into a void of pure, unadulterated gibberish. Honestly, you could have gotten more coherent architectural advice from a monkey on mushrooms. That was our first real taste of total model collapse. I actually got to see this nightmare reincarnated in the wild today, and it was tragic. I'm working on an application where we use different models for specific tasks, and I asked the developers to produce a comprehensive user guide. The plan was to feed this guide into the Retrieval Augmented Generation system, the RGAE help system. You know the one, it's that smug little chatbot sitting in the bottom right corner of your screen, waiting to help you navigate the interface. I'm sure you've seen them, and I'm sure you've probably wanted to delete them. But instead of writing a manual with human intent and clarity, they just pointed an LLM at the application and the raw source code and said, create a user guide for this app. And on the surface, it did exactly that. It looked professional, it had headers, it had bullet points, it looked nice, but when you actually sat down to read the words, it was 90% filler junk and maybe 10% substance. For a human, it's just about readable because our brains are hardwired to filter out the noise and skip over the shit. IKEA would be proud of the layout, but a HeyGen manual editor, or my good friend Judith, would be in fucking tears at the total lack of mechanical soul. The real problem wasn't the human experience, though, it was the machine, because the LLM-generated guide used so many identical generic filler words, the actual message was completely drowned out. When the RAG system tried to find answers, it choked. The old search algorithm was just too primitive for this level of AI-generated bloat. It simply counted keywords once per chunk. If a word was present, it got a point, binary, simple. And because this generic manual mentioned the search terms constantly in its fluff, those irrelevant chunks scored just as high or even higher than the actual technical instructions. I had to get back under the hood and rewrite the entire scoring algorithm from scratch to save it. I moved away from that present or not score and implemented a system that counts capped, stemmed keyword occurrences and then normalizes them by the total chunk length. I had to force the system to understand distribution and focus. Now, a tight 100-word guide that mentions the search term with a high relative density correctly beats out a bloated 1,200-word document that mindlessly repeats a keyword 157 times. It's the only way to kill the ghost of model collapse before it eats the entire help system alive.